And yes, I talked about a Bulldog last week, and then this week I'm talking about Jesuit University. Yes, I understand that. But the way I look at it right now is that Northeastern, they're up 2-0 against these players that he's started against. So you guys can't even handle Steph Curry and Kawhi Leonard. Now back to the corner D. Welcome back to another week, everyone, where we are trying to figure out who is the best player in the NBA right now that came from a mid-major conference. As always, I hope you are all staying safe and staying healthy. And yes, I know that we are all really extremely missing sports, and I hate keep reminding you all about sports. But let's also celebrate the fact that so many sports have gone through so many changes, especially with college basketball having schools going from mid-major programs to going to power teams. Now, while yes, this was their first year as seasonal champions in the Big East, Creighton, in my opinion, is a very underrated team from the Big East and from any sort of power conference. And yeah, I know what you're all thinking. Why am I talking about power conferences when I'm talking about mid majors? Well, the person that we're talking about today, Doug McDermott, came from a mid major school of Creighton when Creighton was in the Missouri Valley Conference. And then his senior year was in the Big East. Now, I know this is going to put a whole gray area as to who is a mid-major player or who is a power conference player, but I'm going to keep Doug McDermott within the mid-major category because his first 3 years were a part of the Missouri Valley Conference and then his senior year. So it was more majority in a mid-major conference. And now on to his backstory. Greg McDermott, Doug's father, was the head coach of Northern Iowa in 2001 to 2006 and then transferred over to Iowa State Cyclones to 2006 to 2010. And Doug McDermott originally committed to Northern Iowa, but then later decommitted and then committed to Creighton, where his father took a coaching job in 2010 to where he became the Big East Coach of the Year this year. And Doug McDermott was only a 3-star recruit that year, and it actually was a pretty big steal for Creighton, in my opinion, especially since they did make the tournament all 3 years, get really high in the rankings come his senior year, and only made the CBI tournament once and then March Madness tournament for the other 3 years. And his first game had an explosive start, going off with 16 points and 7 rebounds against Alabama State. And then in the very second game of that season, had to go against Greg McDermott's former team of Iowa State. And against Iowa State, Doug McDermott put up an equal performance nearly by putting up 16 points and 5 rebounds, but ultimately lost 91 to 88 against the Iowa Cyclones. Now, just wait a minute, because we are going to talk about Northern Iowa just soon, because we're about to get into the Missouri Valley Conference. But until that game, Doug McDermott did put up a freshman career high in points against Drake University with 28 points on New Year's Day. I guess someone wasn't out partying the night before. And then put up a freshman career high in rebounds with 17 rebounds against Bradley. And now on to the Northern Iowa Creighton rivalry that I'm going to loosely call it during this era. On January 26 of 2011, Creighton lost to Northern Iowa 71 to 66, and then exactly 1 month later beat them on February 26 by a score of 63 to 55. And then later in the Missouri Valley Conference tournament, Creighton beat Northern Iowa in a very close 3-point win of 60 to 57, and then go on to play Montana State, where they did lose by 10 points by the final score of 60 to 50. But this did put Creighton over Northern Iowa in a 2-1 matchup during the McDermott's era there. Then unfortunately, Creighton qualified for the College Basketball Invitational Tournament. Link down in the description below to the Damian Lillard video where we explain what this tournament was and the different rankings of the different tournaments. And in their first game in the CBI tournament, Creighton beat San Jose State, who we will probably be talking about in a future video, and then go on to play Davidson College, who has really taken a downturn since Stephen Curry's career, and then go on to beat UCF, who is really more known for their football in recent years. And then comes the championship game, which really makes the CBI tournament really extremely different than any other tournaments. And the reasoning why is because it is actually a best of 3 championships, and they still hold that to today. In the first game of the CBI tournament in 2011, Creighton matched up against Oregon, which was actually a very tight, close game, which actually led to all 3 games being played. The first game, Creighton beats Oregon by the score of 84-76, with McDermott going 21 points and 4 rebounds, and then falls way short in the second game by a score of 71-56, with McDermott only scoring 6 points. And in the final game, McDermott did put up a pretty solid 13 points, going 3 for 4 from the 3-point line, but in a very close 2-point loss to Oregon, which meant that this came to a closure of McDermott's freshman career. And in Doug McDermott's freshman career, he scored on average 14.9 points per game, goes 52.6% from the field, and 7.2 from rebounding, while also setting the Missouri Valley Conference freshman point record at 581 points. And then when it came to his sophomore year, Doug McDermott did not miss an opportunity for 20 points. In fact, he probably only had about 4 games this entire sophomore season of not scoring 20 points. In fact, his first game against North Carolina A&T was one of 4 games where he scored only 12 or 13 points, but he goes on to his sophomore career having 11 double-doubles, having 20-plus points in 23 games, having 30-plus points in 6 games, and having 1 game of 40-plus points, which was against Bradley, where he scored 44 points. And upon all that, he actually got 8 rebounds, 3 for 5 from the 3-point line, and a perfect 5 for 5 from the free throw line. And what about the Northern Iowa rivalry? Well, that was split this season. In the first game, it was Creighton winning by a score of 63-60, and the second game was Northern Iowa winning 65-62, which put the record at 3-2, and they did not meet up in the Missouri Valley Conference tournament, so that was going to be it for this season. And then comes the Missouri Valley Conference tournament, which Creighton ends up beating Drake, Evansville, and Illinois State. And which, by the way, if anyone actually wants to know, Evansville in the Missouri Valley Conference this season went 0-18, and they also beat Kentucky at the beginning of the season by like 2 or 3 points. But wow, that is embarrassing. And as much as I would love to talk about that game, let's go back to Doug McDermott, with Creighton entering the 2012 March Madness tournament as an 8 seed, facing off against Alabama, who they did beat by 1 point, with Doug McDermott putting up 16 points and 10 rebounds. And then they go on to face North Carolina, who was the 1 seed and also had Harrison Barnes on that team. And despite Doug McDermott putting up 20 points and 9 rebounds, Creighton unfortunately lost to North Carolina by the score of 87-73, which puts the sophomore year as a close. But Doug McDermott finished off his sophomore career putting up 22.9 points, which was 3rd overall in the nation, scoring an astonishing 60.9% from the field, and then getting 8.2 rebounds on top of all of that. And in total, McDermott put up 801 points, had 307 made field goals, and made a school record of a 48.6% from a 3-point shot. And now comes the junior year, where McDermott started off with an explosive 21 point and 11 rebound start against North Texas, and then goes to score 5 points against the University of Alabama, Birmingham. Which, by the way, awesome logo. I approve of that logo. However, McDermott was able to recover from that game and goes on to have an amazing sophomore career, where he had 20-plus points in 26 games, had 30-plus points in 7 games, and 1 game of 40-plus points, which was the last game of the season against Wichita State, where he put up 41 points, went 5 for 8 from the 3-point line, and still got 6 rebounds. And then in the Missouri Valley Conference tournament, Creighton beats Drake, Indiana State, and Wichita State to claim the 7 seed in the March Madness tournament, with only 7 losses on the season. And then for the Northern Iowa rivalry, Creighton and Northern Iowa split, with the first game going to Creighton by a score of 79-68, and then the second game going to Northern Iowa with a score of 61-58, putting the record at 4-3, and this was the last and final game. And then in the NCAA March Madness tournament, Creighton faced off against 10th seed Cincinnati, where they did beat them by the score of 67-63, and McDermott had a very impressive 27 points, 11 for 11 from the free throw line, and 11 rebounds. And then they go on to face the second seed Duke, where McDermott did put up 21 points, 9 rebounds, and go 12 for 12 from the free throw line, but they did unfortunately lose to Duke. And then in his junior year, Doug McDermott put up 23.2 points, 7.7 rebounds, 54.9 field goal percentage, 49% from the three-point line, and then 87.5 from the free throw line. And then Doug McDermott relinquished his scholarship come his senior year and demoted himself to a walk-on, despite that he still was going to get a starting role anyways within the Big East. And this was more due in part that then senior guard Grant Gibbs had already missed out a full season the year before after transferring to Creighton, but then became a 6-year college basketball athlete after having already missed a full year that season before with the Gonzaga University. You knew about this, didn't you? Like, what are you thinking? You know what? Just go back in that corner, and maybe not even next week we'll talk about you. We'll get back to you somewhere probably when this whole quarantine is over. But anyways, Doug McDermott enters his senior year putting up an impressive 20 points and 5 rebounds against Alcorn State, but then goes on to have 30 games of 20 plus points, 30 plus points in 13 games, and 1 game of 40 plus points. And the one game where he got 40 plus points was against Providence in the last game of the season, going 45 points and 7 rebounds, which gave them a 14-4 record and a 24-6 overall record. And at the end of the season, Creighton was second in the Big East, just behind Villanova, and ended up 16th in the rankings and actually achieved a high of 9th in the rankings before losing to Xavier during the season. And then during the March Madness tournament, Creighton was 3rd seed in their bracket, beating the University of Louisiana Raging Calhouns, where McDermott did put up a double-double of 30 points and 12 rebounds. And then they go on to play 6th seed Baylor, where they suffered a devastating 85-55 loss, with McDermott putting up 15 points. And despite the loss, McDermott put up 26.7 points, 7 rebounds, 52.6% from the field, and 86.4% from the free throw line. And then he goes on to become the consensus National Player of the Year and have a list of awards that I can't even memorize. He won Sporting News, Oscar Robertson Trophy, NABC Player of the Year, Associated Press College Basketball Player of the Year, Naismith College Player of the Year, and the Wooden Award. Is there an award that he just did not win this year? And then at the end of his college career, McDermott placed 5th overall in NCAA scoring at 3,150 points and became one of 3 players with 3,000 points and 1,000 rebounds, and set a record for most double-doubles at 135 games. And this all allowed him to become drafted 11 overall by the Denver Nuggets in the 2014 draft, which then he was traded that night to the Chicago Bulls, to which then Chicago Bulls later on in his career traded him to the Thunder, and then Thunder traded him to the Knicks, and then the Knicks traded him to the Dallas Mavericks, and then the Mavericks traded him to the Indiana Pacers, where he still currently plays. And then in all of this, I would have to give Doug McDermott probably the 6th man of a mid-major career in terms of what he's been able to accomplish in the NBA, because he's only started 14 games of his 341 games that he's played in. So I mean, I'm going to give you 6th man of the year for all of this stuff. It is an amazing story to tell from you, Doug McDermott, as well as from your father. That was an interesting backstory from him too, about his whole entire coaching stuff. And I'm glad that he's able to win the Big East champion this year in terms of the seasonal play. And I was hoping to see Creighton win that tournament as well and go on to see how well they would have done this March Madness. But we'll never know how good Creighton would have been this year. But anyways, as always, Doug McDermott, thank you so much for representing mid-majors in the NBA. We cannot express how awesome of a career you have and how much your name means to us mid-majors. And as always for you guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Please click like, please share this video with everyone, please subscribe, and please remember to still just continue to wash your hands.